As you know, the convention is Saturday. We hope Todd will be there. He's recovering from COVID. The hearings, some of you may have done them before, is something we've done in the diocese quite a lot over the years, and it's really been a successful way for people to get a better understanding of what the resolutions are, to give a kind of preliminary opportunity for people to ask questions or make criticisms or hear from the sponsors and from others. The way we normally do it, and so the way I'll propose we do it tonight is we will go right down the list of resolutions, starting with the two amendments, A and B. And we'll begin each one of the resolutions by my calling on a sponsor, if he or she is present, to just speak very briefly to the resolution since we have it, but just to know the rest of us, just so the rest of us know that the sponsor or someone from the sponsoring team is here. And then we'll open it up for comments from others. Please try to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. I will keep time. It won't be strict unless it turns out we get short on time, but try to keep your questions or comments brief, and 3 minutes ought to be enough. And then we won't ask the sponsor to respond to every comment, but before we close the discussion of a particular resolution, certainly then the sponsor would be welcome if she or he wants to say something if it clarifies things. So with that, let's begin with resolution A. Resolutions A and B go together. They both have to do with changing the pronouns for bishops and clergy. The reason we have two resolutions is that one is for amendment to the diocesan constitution, and the second one, resolution B, is for changing the pronouns in the diocesan canons. Now, just so you know, to amend the diocesan constitution requires the action of two successive annual conventions. So assuming that this is approved on Saturday, it will come up again next year for final approval, and then there will be an amendment of the Constitution. With respect to the amendment to the diocesan canons, on the other hand, that can be done in one convention, so long as it's approved by 2/3 of a vote by orders, both the clergy and the laypersons. If it's not approved by 2/3 in each of the two orders, but it is approved by a majority, then it'll be carried over to next year's convention. But if it is voted on and approved by 2/3 in each order, then it'll be amended this year. So you have it before you, changing the pronouns for bishops, clergy, and other persons. Courtney, I know you're here. Do you want to say something briefly about it?
Sure, absolutely. Good evening, everybody. It's great to see you. Resolution, pronouns are imperfect. I am here to say that. And yet we recognize that having our pronouns say either, in some cases in our canon, and these particular, both our constitution and canon, some places it says he, some it says he and she, and that to seek a place where we can be more gender neutral and be more inclusive of pronouns other than he and she. The canon essentially resolution asks that all pronouns referring to bishops, clergy, and other persons be listed with gender neutral pronouns. The initial plan would be to use they, but as our language evolves, this affords the opportunity to actually make changes as language evolves.
Okay.
That's all I'll say.
Thank you. Any questions, comments on resolutions? We might take them together, A and B, since the purpose is the same. Okay. Everybody okay with A and B? Last call. All right. Then let's turn to resolution C, which has been restyled. It originally in the package, I think, says minimum clergy compensation. It's now been restyled to make it a little more precise and accurate to say compensation guidelines for priests. This comes up every year. Keith, the diocesan treasurer, would you like to speak to it?
So I'll move adoption of resolution C-185.
Well,
if there.
Yeah, actually, we're not taking motions tonight. You can do that at the convention, but we understand that at the convention, you'll be moving the resolution.
So yes, I'll move. Sorry. I'll move for adoption of C-185, and then I'll refer it to others for discussion.
Okay, well, since the motion has to await convention, why don't we go ahead and ask if there's a discussion by others? You see it there before you. It does represent, as the explanation says, a suggested increase based on some of the high inflation rates we've all been experiencing. I think it says what it's about 4.6%.
4.6%.
4.6%, yeah. Which is a little below the CPI for the Chicago area. Since we're on screen, you're welcome to raise your hand, but you're also welcome just to speak up, and then you'll be recognized because we can't see everybody at one time.
This is Luke Wetzel, who's here representing the Diocesan Convention, who's putting forward this resolution. And just to make things clear for anyone who might be new, this is a standard resolution that comes up every year, representing a different cost of living reality each year for updating minimum clergy compensation. But this is identical to what was submitted last year, except for the number. So this isn't anything new. We've done this for a long time.
All right, resolution C going once, going twice. If there's nothing more, we will move to resolution D, as in David.
Hey, wait a minute. I
Uh-oh.
unmuted myself. I just have a quick question, clarification, because people that live in downtown Chicago, it costs a lot more to live there than it does in downtown Springfield. How does that get determined in this? I have nothing against raising the prices, but how do you deal with that, with the cost of living with different towns for the priests?
Keith, would you like to respond?
So there is no reconciliation between Chicago and all the various areas within the diocese. That has been discussed many times, and we've published in our publications at this convention, we published a compensation throughout the diocese. So that is in the documents that have been provided, but there is no way to equate this throughout the diocese. Through all the years we've discussed it and considered the question, there is no way to reconcile it.
One change, Keith, if I'm reading the explanation correctly, is that this is the first year that the recommendation would be mandatory for part-time clergy.
Right. Yes, it's 1/2. You can see it's 1/2.
Right.
We have a hand raised.
Oh, yeah, Anna.
Yeah, the part-time did go into effect last year for our convention. So we had that listed last year. But also to speak to Heather's comments, in the explanation, Heather, it does talk about the Chicago, Naperville, Elgin. And while it may not include all the counties of Illinois, it does list all the counties that are included within this, the increase in the CPI that we take. So there are a few more than just Chicago or Cook.
Okay, anything else?
Thank you. I appreciate it that I didn't see the explanation because I hadn't scrolled down to see that. So sorry, I hadn't read that part. So
Okay. Then resolution D, commitment to nonviolence and state and federal regulation of firearms. Would one of the sponsors, if he or she is present, like to speak to that?
This is Brian Cones, pastor at Trinity Church in Highland Park. So I'm one of the sponsors along with Cara Wagner Scher and a member of the standing committee, whose name is suddenly escaping me. Sorry, Cara, you can help me. So this resolution appears to be a response to the shooting in Highland Park. Go ahead, Cara.
Laura Singer.
Laura,
It's
thank
on
you,
the
Laura
screen for
Singer. My
people.
goodness. I'm not looking at the screen, sorry. So this appears to be a resolution response to the shooting in Highland Park. In some ways, it is not. It was actually created last year in an attempt to respond to the verdict from Kyle Rittenhouse, the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict. We've expanded it this year, and in some ways to escalate, in some ways, our diocesan commitment to some political action, particularly in relation to the regulation of some forms of firearms that are often used in mass shootings, but also that are used in other kinds of shootings that don't result in as many victims. As we drafted it, we were looking for opportunities, one, to invite our congregations in our diocese to make some financial commitments, but also to offer several different opportunities to do that. So it could be in helping to lobby for changes to legislation at the state and federal level to restrict some of these weapons. It could also be supporting community organizations that either respond to the needs of victims of such violence, or community organizations that try to address the root causes of this kind of violence. And I think that our desire is also to cast a wide net, not to be so focused on headline grabbing events that, however tragic, don't really capture the full gamut of this kind of violence. So we hope that we'll have broad support and that our congregations in our diocese will be able to make some financial commitments to remedying this kind of situation. So since Cara's here, also she might like to add something as well.
If you could scroll down to the explanation, I think that would be helpful to people. And just to point out that this does ask for a monetary commitment on the part of congregations and the diocese. So unlike many resolutions that say this will not affect the budget, this could. As always, it has to do, there's not really an enforcement mechanism. It has to do with people's willingness to do it. I don't think there's more to say.
As you point out, this is Richard, the portion that asks parishes to commit 1% of their income to these things is that it uses the word urge, but the second resolve uses the word require. So it looks as if the resolution were adopted, that would be a requirement that the diocesan budget commit 1% of its income to nonviolence, common sense gun laws, and peaceful community building. So one question people might have is, how did you come up with the 1%? And do you understand that to be a constraint, a requirement on the budget? Is that what was meant?
Yeah, actually, I think originally it was required in both cases, and we changed the parish to urge. And I think the 1% is just similar to the 1% asked for seminaries. So that was just, it was a way to give some kind of a framework.
Yeah,
Brian,
yeah, I
if you
understand.
have more thoughts.
So the 1% is going to come from the main revenue source to the diocese. Is gifts or contributions from congregations. And we don't expect that to go up. Indeed, every year it goes down about $50,000 on average, maybe a little bit more. So what we're requiring here will require a prioritization. We finished the budget for 2023. So it would require taking something out of the budget or reducing some other budget to accommodate this roughly $50,000, $40,000 to $50,000. Or it would require the diocese to take money out of its the Bishop funds, which was discussed quite a bit at the budget hearing. So that's a point of information.
Other thoughts on this resolution? I think probably, I mean, certainly there's widespread support for a commitment to nonviolence and gun laws in this part of the country. I don't think that's a problem. I think there may be some debate on the floor about the effect on the budget. And I suppose it's up to the people who administer the budget, but I would think once the $40,000 or $50,000 is found, then as you say, Keith, there would have to be some mechanism by which it's figured out how to spend that money and for what purpose. That's not set out of the resolution, probably intentionally, but that requirement, you know, will have to be adhered to when the budget is prepared. Now, I suppose one way you could interpret it is that when is the budget prepared each year, Keith? You say the one is prepared for 2023. When usually is that completed?
Well, it's approved. It'll be approved. It was approved back in September. It did not include this budget allocation. But it starts getting prepared in about April. And
So
the
you could
preparation.
argue that it wouldn't have to be added until 2024.
That's one possibility. I mean, this year, the 2023 budget will presumably be approved by this convention, right?
No, it was already approved.
Oh, approved by the diocesan council?
It was approved by the council and the bishop and trustees in September.
Well, if it's already been approved, I mean, I think that lends support to the idea that possibly it would be interpreted to apply not to the 23 budget, but to the 24 budget. So that's something else that might come up, but I think that would be a reasonable interpretation, particularly if the proponents of the resolution would be comfortable with that. Well, that's not something we have to resolve tonight, but tonight the purpose is just to highlight issues and give people a chance to think them over, comment on them if they'd like to, and give it some thought before Saturday. Is there anything else on resolution D? All right. Resolution E. Opposition to detention and surveillance of immigrants and asylum seekers. We have several sponsors. Do we have one present who would like to speak to it?
Yes, this is Ann Smith from Annunciation in Gurnee and a member of the Peace and Justice Committee, Peace and Justice Committee is one of the sponsors of the resolution. And just to highlight just some points about this resolution is addressing firstly national policies on immigration, both the policy for immigration detention and surveillance. So it'll say here U.S. government policy as unjust. And the other part is to promote community-based support for alternates to detention and surveillance, which would be much more effective than detention and surveillance. A major author of this resolution is present, and that is Reverend Sandra Castillo, and I would like to invite her to further speak to the resolution if something can be added, and of course, entertain questions.
All right. Reverend Sandra Castillo.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Richard. This resolution actually arises from the resolution that the convention, the Diocesan Convention of 2019 passed, F-182, which declared our diocese to be a sanctuary diocese. And part of that resolution called for demanding an end of government policies that was requiring the deportation of millions of undocumented immigrants. Detention and electronic surveillance is part of that same process. And so in order for us to effectively implement the sanctuary diocese resolution, one of the things that we have to deal with is the fact that immigration detention and electronic surveillance must stop. The other thing is that recently, effective the beginning of this year, as a result of state legislation from last year, our state, the state of Illinois, has prohibited any detention centers operating in the state of Illinois. And so now we are in a position where, although our state prohibits immigrant detention, because this is a federal issue, residents of our state, residents of our diocese, and possibly members of our diocese can still be detained by ICE in other detention centers. And so we are asking that we take a position that all detention centers be terminated and that electronic surveillance as well be terminated. And part of the folks who have helped us put this together are present to speak to different aspects of this resolution. Damon Doucet from St. Matthews, he's the junior warden and he is also a delegate to convention, is going to speak to our baptismal covenant and the demands of our baptismal covenant to pass this resolution. Jack Lloyd, who is a guest and a member of our task force and EMM and Province 5 Migration Ministry Network, can speak to his role when EMM developed this resolution for General Convention. And he can also speak to the fact that Province 5 passed this resolution at this last synod. Province 4 amended it to make it even more stringent and stronger and passed it at its last synod. And our guest, Ed Pratt, who is a Presbyterian minister and the executive director of Interfaith Community for Detained Immigrants, can speak to the many local community-based organizations that can provide more effective and more economical alternatives to detention and to electronic monitoring. So I would ask Damon if you could speak for a few minutes about our spiritual basis for this resolution.
Yeah, be happy to. And my remarks will be tighter, obviously, when we speak on Friday. But just here's where I'm planning to go with it. First, we need to look at the head of our church, who was himself an immigrant or an asylum seeker in Egypt. The angels came to his father Joseph, our father Joseph, and told him that he needed to take the child and flee in order to save his life. He did that. And while scripture is silent on how the Egyptians received him, they eventually returned home to Nazareth safe and sound. So we've got to imagine that they were received somewhat pleasantly, or at least neutrally. They weren't inhibited in any way. And the other part of it goes to what we as baptized Christians are called to do. The 10 Commandments are the Old Testament, and they are as valid today as they were when Moses brought them down from Sinai. But the Lord gave us not new covenants, but he gave us a synopsized version. And I've always been struck by this. We are to love God with all our heart, soul, and mind. And we are to love each other as we love ourselves. And on these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. This is when I first understood the two great commandments, I realized that if you honor those two things, the other 10 commandments are taken care of. You're done. You're good. You've done that, because you can't do those other things if you honor the two great commandments. And that is the basis for my support of this, or at least the part of it that I'm going to speak to is in support of this resolution. These are our brothers and sisters. They are, I don't know if anybody has had the opportunity, but if you get the opportunity, I would urge you to read the writings of Archbishop Oscar Romero, talking about oppression, talking about treating others as less than human, which is a greater subject than this resolution, but one we're dealing with in this country. How do we deal with our history and the way we treat others?
Let me just ask you if we can move on. We're in the interest of time.
But anyway, that's sort of basically it.
And maybe Mr. Lloyd and Mr. Pratt, if you could go ahead and say something, but try to keep it within 3 minutes if you can. Mr. Lloyd, I guess, first.
Yeah, thank you for the hearing. I work among other organizations that are interested in immigrant justice with the Episcopal Migration Ministry, and specifically I take part in the Asylum and Detention Ministry network there, and a subgroup of that network that's interested in advocacy. And at the beginning of this year, we looked at the resolutions that exist within the Episcopal Church about immigration and about incarceration. And there are a lot of very good resolutions there. You know, Episcopal Migration Ministries can trace its history all the way back to the 1930s in terms of working for immigrant justice. But we found that there was not a very clear statement saying that detention of immigrants who are not criminals is wrong, and that surveillance of immigrants is not a humane substitute for detention, but rather that a more moral and also more cost-effective way to take immigrants through the process that may or may not lead them to detention, depending on how their trial turns out. A better way to do that is through community-based nonprofit programs that keep track of the need to stay on track with their deportation proceedings, but also allow them freedom and human dignity. So that's what that's the motivation for this resolution, which has been passed by Province 5 and also passed by Province 4 of the Episcopal Church, who actually made a small change to it that actually strengthened the wording of the resolution. So it has a lot of support as well as at the General Convention. So we hope that the Diocese of Chicago will also be supportive of this resolution.
Thank you. Mr. Pratt?
Thank you. ICDI works with people who come to our borders primarily seeking safety and freedom. Their stories are fairly horrifying. They're fleeing intolerable situations. Some have seen family members killed. Some have been threatened by government forces with death. Some have had their homes and property seized by the government. Some have been outspoken against injustices to their government. And many are part of a population that is not protected in their country, such as LGBTQIA people. When these people arrive at our borders, they're separated from their family members. They're detained in county jails. Some are held for years. They are treated as criminals are treated. They were traumatized enough to leave everything behind. They are further traumatized by their journey here. Many are raped and robbed along the way to our border, and they're traumatized again by being placed in jails. Our country spends approximately $70,000 a year per immigrant to keep them in detention. There are alternatives that can be offered by community-based organizations such as ICDI. We've been doing this for 9 years now. We've offered housing, wraparound care. We give medical, dental, mental health help. The people range in age from under a year to over 70 years old. We've helped 1- and 2-parent families with children. We've helped single adults, male and female. The people staying with ICDI receive all of that care. They also receive English as second language classes, education to transfer their skills from their country to our country, also job training if needed. Programs such as this take highly traumatized people, and we help them become contributing members of this society. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, are there others? And since we can't see you on the screen, just speak up if you've got a question or a comment about the resolution. Just identify yourself and we'd be happy to hear from you. All right. Want to make sure people have time to turn off the mute button in case they want to say something. But if not, we will turn to resolution F. Commitment.
There is a question that says, what is ISDCF?
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ed.
I'm sorry, you said someone had a question?
Yeah, what is
Somebody put a question in the chat that says, what is ICDI?
Oh, Interfaith Community for Detained Immigrants. We have visited people in the jails until January when the jails no longer held immigrants. We minister to the children who are being held by the Office of Refugee Resettlement here in Chicago. There are about 600. And we also do this housing program. Right now, we're also very involved in the buses coming north from Texas. And it may interest you to know that there are at least 2,000 people in hotels in this area that have decided they wanted to stay in Northern Illinois, and they will need housing. We're talking about 600 to 700 apartments. And right now, this welcoming state and this welcoming city have no plan to provide housing for these people. So we're always looking for congregations to adopt a family, and churches that have done this, synagogues that have done this. They've been transformed by meeting these families and learning from them. So I would encourage you to not only adopt this, but work with Sandra who is very involved at the level, city level and state level here. And she can hook your congregation up with a magnificent organization and get you involved in a very real way. I do not believe forced migration is going to end anytime soon. I believe it will continue to increase for the rest of our lifetimes.
Excuse me, I see it has a cost impact. Can you speak to that?
I can speak to that. With the formation of the Sanctuary Task Force, Bishop Lee, we had recommended that the diocese become a member of the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. He decided that we should go ahead and do that. We have been a member ever since. So apparently that $1,500 is built into the budget because we have continued to pay our membership fee. And we do need to become a member. It's very important for us to have as many connections, as many links as possible, because no one group can do this job itself. So we do it collaboratively. And we must become a member of Detention Watch Network. Jack Lloyd is a member of it, an active participant. And the annual fee is $175. So I really think that we will be able to get an allocation of $175, a new allocation of $175 every year to join that organization.
Anything else on E? Okay, thank you all for your presentations and for your explanations. So let's turn to F. Commitment to anti-racism work in congregations. And we'll ask one of the sponsors to speak to that if we have one present.
Cara, would you like to introduce the resolution and then I'll give the background?
Sure. It is a resolution to continue our commitment as a diocese to anti-racism work, but more specifically to put the onus of that work on congregations and give them some resources to do that, and to have a little bit of accountability by asking for a report to the bishop each year as to what each individual congregation is doing. I may have just taken your words, Duncan, sorry.
Sure. Well, this resolution comes out of the work we've done at St. John's Church in Chicago. And I should add, we have the members of our anti-racism team joining us on this call. Our work is, our belief is that it's time for everyone in the diocese to fully commit to the work of anti-racism as a church and as the body of Christ. The top leadership in the U.S. church is diverse. Our diocesan leadership is diverse, but we can't really be satisfied with a top-down approach. We need our efforts to dismantle racism to infiltrate also from the bottom up, from the local and congregational level to completely populate our work in the church. This resolution empowers rectors, vestry, and congregations who want to move forward with this work. We're making it a requirement. In my conversations with people around the diocese, I observe that there's a lot of interest in this work, but at the same time, a lot of passivity where action is required, and sometimes a little bit of passive resistance. We feel at St. John's we don't have time for this anymore. The era when it was okay to look the other way and just kind of throw up your hands, that's past. Everybody needs to do something at this point. The resolution gives congregations a lot of freedom to decide how they want to approach this work. And it also lets them choose a way that resonates with their community, with their constituency, with their individual constituency, however they wish to approach it. And there are a number of ways of defining racism and anti-racism work. The definition we use at St. John's is racism equals race prejudice and misuse of power by systems and institutions. We have a lot of information on our website, stjohnschicago.com, many resources, a video sort of explaining how we got started on this road and why we commend it to other congregations in the diocese. And I also invite you to read the explanation of the resolution. It gives a lot of background and the history of anti-racism work in this diocese. We do have a lot of things to be proud of for our work in the Diocese of Chicago. And finally, I just want to say out loud the concluding paragraph of our explanation, which is that we're trying to support a more universal and consistent response to racism among our various parishes, so that the Episcopal Church may be experienced and seen as the body of Christ, living out our call to work for justice in the wider world. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. Are there other comments?
This is Jeremy Froyen from St. John the Evangelist in Flossmoor. And this is a comment question, but I'm curious if the Diocesan Anti-Racism Commission is doing anything to create diocesan resources. I support the intention behind this resolution. My concern is that the way that I'm reading it, at least, and I could be reading it wrong, but the way I read it is that this is requiring each congregation to create an anti-racism team to create another program. I think there would be a lot more support to on this resolution if programs are coming from the Anti-Racism Commission that we could use.
Jeremy?
Yes.
Yeah, so that actually, all our training, the Anti-Racism Commission does supply training and actually pays for part of our training. So we do have those resources. I think our idea of individual teams is not a huge team. I mean, the team could be a person on the vestry and a person in the congregation and the rector or something. But yeah, the Anti-Racism Commission does have resources that we can use.
Let's go to the bottom of the resolution. There is a list of resources on page 15. Yeah, there. Is that part of what you were referring to?
Yes.
Okay.
So
this is Newland Smith. I just speak a minute. I'm a member of the Anti-Racism Commission, and we are most willing to work with any congregation in the diocese as to how they begin to implement this resolution. And in some ways, it goes back to the final report of the task force on the legacy of slavery. One of the recommendations was that each congregation in the diocese do the work that the task force did for the entire diocese in their own congregation in its local context. And we're more than willing, would be excited to work with any of the 122 congregations in this diocese.
Newland, can you speak to whether or not that link to that task force report if it works now? For years, it was a broken link. And I had tried the first couple of years I was in the diocese, was trying to get a copy of that report and wasn't able to do that.
I tested it before I put it into this document.
So it's working now?
Should be.
Thank you.
Did for me.
Good.
Lois?
Yes, I'm from St. John's Naperville, and for the last two conventions, the Crossroads Regional Organizing for Anti-Racism has had programs exactly for what you're talking about. They've offered the programs. If the congregation wants to get involved, they've offered them. I've attended those sessions at the convention when we were in person, and they've offered them. So, and I've been a junior and senior warden for our church. So if the congregation wants to get involved, the programs are there. The congregation has to decide they want to be involved at the grassroots level. But the programs, the diocese have offered those programs consistently. They just have to open their eyes and say, I want to look at them.
Other comments? Sierra, I have a question for you. Suppose after we're finished tonight, I mean, I assume all delegates to the convention already have copies of these resolutions, but assuming someone does not or wants to look at them, are they available on the diocesan website where people can look at them if they don't already have them?
They are.
And how would they access those?
We can go through the website if that would be helpful for folks, but if you go to our webpage and there is a drop-down menu for the 2022 Diocesan Convention, all the resources the convention are located there.
Yeah, that's easy. Okay, thank you very much. Other thoughts about resolution F? Okay, shall we go to G? G is the renewal of a companion diocese relationship with Southeast Mexico and with RENC in South Sudan. We have a number of sponsors. I'm sure one of them is present to speak to resolution G.
I'd like to speak to the resolution. My name is Gary Martin. I'm
Go right ahead.
I'm a coordinator for our companion diocese relationship with Southeast Mexico, and I work with Jackie Kraus. This resolution is very similar to what was brought before convention last year. As you all know, we have had companion diocese relationships with Rank South Sudan and the Diocese of Southeast Mexico since 2001. And those companion relationships were renewed every 5 years up until 2021, when we opted to propose a 1-year renewal, given Bishop-elect Clark had not been consecrated yet, and we didn't think it fair to her to ask her to support a 5-year commitment to these two companion relationships. This year, given she was just consecrated in September, we are proposing a similar 1-year renewal that will allow us then time to fully brief her on the history of these companion relationships, and then moving forward, we would propose 5-year renewals after this 1-year commitment is over. So it's simply going to convention with a 1-year renewal versus 5-year.
All right. Does our relationship with these companion dioceses, I mean, I assume there are opportunities to meet folks from these dioceses, at least meet them in Zoom conferences or something. Does that happen?
Bishop Julio, who is relatively new Bishop of Diocese of Southeast Mexico, was here for Bishop Clark's consecration in September. And he visited several parishes within the diocese while he was here that week. So yes.
Great. Good.
And Archbishop Joseph from South Sudan has visited very often the Diocese of Chicago.
Yeah, I remember he's appeared at convention at least once or twice.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
And both are have issued video greetings to the convention for this year. So.
Oh, great. Okay. Thank you. Other thoughts or questions about this resolution? Right. Resolution H, our last one, is called Supporting a Clean Energy Future and has to do with nuclear power, carbon-free nuclear energy. Would one of the sponsors like to speak to it?
I'm not a sponsor, but my rector, Jenny Hullen, who could not be here tonight, will sponsor it on Saturday.
Okay.
And this is Alan Metzger. I'm a parishioner at St. Simon's in Arlington Heights. Full disclosure, I am a nuclear energy advocate. So that's, let there be no doubt where I'm coming from here. This is a resolution that is almost identical to one that was considered last year that was not passed. The resolution essentially asks the next General Convention to pass its own resolution to endorse the use of nuclear energy for lots of reasons that are listed in the resolution text and the explanation. So I won't go through all of that. I would encourage people to read it, and if you have questions, to reach out directly to me or bring them up on Saturday if you like. But the kind of the bottom line for me is that the world needs lots of energy. Most of the energy that we use right now is causing trouble with our environment. About 85% of our primary energy is from burning things. And the only way that we're going to reduce that is by using all of the tools that God has given us to replace dirty energy with clean energy, and to make other changes to the things that we do to make to reduce our emissions of CO2. So again, the resolution is simple, and it does not require any funding. It's just basically asking the National Church to take a position, much like they would take a policy position on any of the, a number of other issues that that affect society, and in particular that affect the least of these. Much of the world does not have the kind of energy access that we do, electricity or otherwise. Those people and those governments that in their countries are going to want to increase the amount of energy that they have. The way that you lift the world's impoverished out of poverty must include giving them enough energy to do that, enough access to affordable, accessible, clean, safe, and clean energy. Nuclear energy meets all of those things. It's not the answer for everything, but it's got a track record that that would be the envy of any energy source. And again, I would ask you to take a look at the accompanying text to see some more information on that. I'm happy to entertain any questions now.
Thank you. Thank you. Questions, comments? This is one of several resolutions where people have gone to a lot of work on the explanations, which is really helpful. So I hope that all the delegates can not only read the resolutions carefully, but read the explanations, which are helpful context for, the reasons why the sponsors are bringing forth these ideas. Any questions or comments on H? And are there any thoughts or questions or comments in general about the convention or the way the resolutions will fit into convention or anything else before we shortly, I turn it back over to Sierra and we call it a night? Any other comments on anything? State of the world. No, we don't want to go there. Crystal.
I just have one. And this is, I guess, a process thing. Should any of the delegates to convention want to propose amendments, you can pre-file an amendment for any of the resolutions that you see by sending the text of your amendment to secretary@episcopalchicago.org. And the deadline for pre-filing amendments will be Friday at 5 p.m. So, and then if you do want to propose an amendment during convention, delegates will be asked to put the entire text of the amendment that they are proposing in the Q&A. So the Q&A function will be displayed on the bottom of the screen, one of 3 buttons that you'll see. And you can drop the text of your amendment into that field that pops up.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Sorry.
So should there be pre-convention filings of amendments? Are the people who propose the amendments notified in advance?
That part I'm not aware of.
Well, how about when will the delegates be advised that there are amendments proposed to the resolution? At some point, all the delegates have to be advised.
Yeah. So I think in the process, we will have them and we will have them on hand and post them during the debate. I'm imagining that the ones that are pre-filed are the ones we would call on first.
Probably so, yeah. That really does help, and I'm glad you mentioned that. The pre-filing amendments really does help, and the reason why there's a requirement that if it's not pre-filed, but that you do it there, that nonetheless the text be put in, is that it's really impossible for delegates, even in that quick moment they've got, to judge the merits of an amendment if they can't sort of see the text. So, unless it's a very simple amendment. Sometimes a very simple amendment can be done, but if it's more than something simple, it's really helpful to have it pre-filed if possible. And if not, before the delegates in writing in the other form that Crystal mentioned.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions? All right, Sierra, I return the, I'm sorry, did someone say something?
Well, I have one point of clarification. Richard, you mentioned at the beginning our two legislative pieces about pronouns in the canons and in the Constitution. Can you just, for one more time, mention, you said at least one of those we would need to do a vote by orders. Is that correct? And can you just restate that?
Yeah, happy to do that. So we generally divide things that come before the convention into two categories: legislation, which basically means a proposed amendment to the Constitution or canons, and then resolutions. And of course, most of our time is spent on the resolutions. We do have legislation proposed this time. And as you know, they both propose the same thing, changing the pronouns in two different documents. One is the Diocesan Constitution, and the other is the Diocesan Canons. And the process for amendment of those two documents is slightly different. To amend the Constitution, it requires an approved vote of two successive annual conventions. At this first convention, all that's required is a majority vote. And then at the second convention, which would be the final approval, there would have to be a vote by orders on that. So that'll be next year. But for this year's convention, there won't have to be a vote for orders, at least not in the amendment. It doesn't specify that for the constitutional change. That'll occur next year. On the other hand, to change the canon or the canons, that can be done in 1 year, but that does require a vote by orders. That is to say, the ordained folks vote separately from the lay folks, and there has to be a majority in both or each of those two orders in order for there to be a passage. And the amendment canon goes on to say that the amendment will be adopted this year if it is approved by 2/3 of each of the orders. If it is not approved by 2/3 of each of the orders this year, but it is approved by more than 50% of each order, then it'll be carried over automatically to next year's convention and can be voted on again with the very same provisions. Obviously, if it doesn't get 50% in one of the other orders, then it will die. So that'll be the procedure. Does that clarify it?
That was very helpful. Thank you so much. In our virtual convention, that just means that we vote using different tools. And so as the one who's in charge of the tool that allows us to vote by orders, that was very helpful. Thank you so much.
Good. Anything else? All right, Sierra.
I would like to just close us in prayer. Thank you for your presence, your attention, your commitment to us being the hands and feet of God in the world. So much of our faith is incarnational and grounded in the human experience, our shared human experience. And so the resolutions are the opportunity for us to really put our faith into action. And I'm thankful for all of our contributors and those who have spoke to the topics of importance tonight. So let us end our time together in prayer. Let us pray. God, it is night. And as we close this day, we thank you for the gift of our church and the fellowship of our congregations and our members as we seek to be your hands and feet in the world. Bless our business as the church of God, and may our conversations bring you glory and bring us closer to living the kingdom that you have for us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all for your presence tonight.
Thank you.